Ghost Town Chronicles. Ep.2, The Sheriff's Ledger.
The night had fallen heavy over Hollow Creek, a ghost town long forgotten by the world. The moon hung low, its pale light spilling over broken windows and collapsed roofs. Every gust of wind carried with it the creak of old signs and the groan of doors that hadn't been touched in years. In the heart of this silence stood the sheriff's office, its wooden walls leaning with age, its badge above the door almost invisible beneath the rust. Jonah stepped inside, clutching a small lantern. He was only 16, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. The air inside was thick, filled with the smell of old paper, gunpowder, and dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. He ran his fingers across the desk, feeling grooves where the sheriff once carved his initials, back when Hollow Creek was alive. A drawer resisted his pull at first, then gave way with a sudden snap. Jonah's lantern flickered, casting a nervous glow on what lay inside. Bullets, green with corrosion. A badge cracked down the middle. A flask that smelled of whiskey long gone. And beneath it all, a thick leather-bound book, its surface scarred by time. The sheriff's ledger. Jonah froze. His uncle had warned him never to dig into the sheriff's past. But secrets whispered to him in his dreams, urging him closer. His hands trembled as he lifted the ledger, brushing away a film of dust that made him cough. The buckle creaked open, and the pages sighed as if exhaling after years of silence. The first line seemed to rise off the paper, alive with weight. If you are reading this, Hollow Creek is no longer the town I swore to protect. Jonah's breath caught. The words felt less like ink on paper, and more like a voice, stern, weary, and heavy with regret. For a moment, the silence of the sheriff's office seemed to close in on him, and Jonah realized this was no ordinary record. This ledger was a confession and a warning. And with that single sentence, Hollow Creek's buried secrets began to stir awake once more. Jonah placed the ledger on the desk, the lantern's glow dancing across its leather cover. His fingers trembled as he turned the first pages. Lists of names, debts owed, brawls recorded, fines collected. Each entry was written in sharp strokes, every line heavy with duty. But as Jonah read on, the tone shifted. No longer orderly records of law, but whispers of things hidden, shipments unloaded at night, meetings in barns outside town, names of strangers marked only with an X. Jonah leaned closer, his breath fogging the fragile paper. A sketch caught his eye, a rough drawing of a bell tower, circled twice. Underneath, a phrase scrawled, "Not to be rung after sundown." His pulse quickened. What did that mean? Why would the sheriff, a man of law, fear the sound of a bell? The office around him suddenly felt alive. The broken rifle in the corner, the empty wanted posters, the cracked handcuffs on the wall, all of them seemed to echo secrets he could not yet piece together. And the deeper Jonah read, the more he sensed. This ledger was not a book of justice, it was a map of sins. As Jonah traced the ink with his fingertip, the words seemed to lift off the page and shape themselves into images. He saw Sheriff Caleb in the saloon, shaking hands with men cloaked in dust and shadows. A sack of coins exchanged, a ledger slammed shut. Another entry bled into vision, the sheriff standing at the edge of Hollow Creek, watching wagons roll in under cover of darkness. No banners, no traders, only sealed crates, loaded with urgency and guarded by men who never gave their names. Jonah gasped, pulling back, but the images pressed harder into his mind. Each line of the ledger was not merely memory, it was alive, forcing him to witness. And the sheriff he thought he knew, stern, proud, a man of justice, appeared instead as a figure torn between law and something darker. Then Jonah noticed something strange, gaps. Whole sections of the ledger had been torn out, leaving jagged edges like wounds. The missing pages were not random, they aligned with the dates of Hollow Creek's most infamous events. The great fire that consumed half the town, the night the church bells rang until dawn, the disappearance of 3 families who were never seen again. Jonah's heart pounded. Someone had wanted these truths buried, and if the sheriff himself had removed them, it meant his silence was deliberate. But if another hand had stolen them, then someone else carried the darkest part of Hollow Creek's history. The last intact entries of the ledger chilled Jonah more than anything. Sheriff Caleb wrote not with the certainty of a lawman, but with the hesitation of a man haunted. Justice is not always the law, and the law is not always just. Another line, scrawled in uneven ink: "If I fall, let the bell be silent. Its sound belongs to them, not us." Jonah whispered the words aloud, his voice shaking. The sheriff was confessing, yes, but also warning. Was Caleb protecting the town from something worse, or was he complicit in its corruption? The truth balanced on a knife's edge. Jonah closed the ledger slowly, but its weight still pressed against his chest. He was no longer reading a book. He was inheriting a burden. And somewhere beyond the broken windows, the night of Hollow Creek listened, waiting for him to decide what to do next. Ethan sat in the sheriff's office, the ledger heavy in his hands. A strange feeling gnawed at him, like the walls had ears. Through the dusty window, he caught fleeting movement, a shadow slipping between the buildings. He froze. Someone was out there. The floorboards creaked behind him. Ethan spun around, only to see Lena standing in the doorway, her face pale. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered. "This town isn't empty. At night I hear boots on the street, but when I look, no one's there." Ethan tried to steady his breath, closing the ledger. Lena stepped closer, her voice shaking. "Don't trust the silence. Someone's watching you, just like they watched Sheriff Caleb before he vanished." That night, Ethan couldn't shake Lena's words. When the moon climbed high, he heard it too, soft, deliberate footsteps outside. He slipped out of the office, revolver at his side, and followed faint prints in the dust. They led past the saloon, past the collapsed blacksmiths, and out toward the desert edge. Every sound seemed louder, the rustle of dry brush, the whisper of wind against old wood. Ethan crouched low, tracing the trail. Then he spotted it. A flicker of lantern light far ahead, vanishing behind a cluster of rocks. He tightened his grip on the gun. Whoever carried that lantern wasn't a ghost. Ethan crept closer, hiding behind a boulder. Voices drifted through the night, low, hurried, unmistakably human. He couldn't make out every word, but one phrase chilled him: "The ledger mustn't leave the town." His pulse quickened. They were talking about the sheriff's book. Suddenly, the voices stopped. Silence. Then, a rock shifted near him. Whoever was out there knew he was close. Ethan stayed perfectly still, the desert night pressing down like a weight. Then, a mocking laugh cut through the darkness. "You're digging in graves that don't belong to you, stranger," a voice called. "Best leave before you join them." But no one stepped forward. Just the echo, taunting him from the shadows. Ethan's hand trembled on the revolver, but he didn't fire. He knew shooting into shadows would be a mistake. Instead, he backed slowly toward town, his senses burning. The laughter still echoed, following him like a phantom. When he reached the sheriff's office, Lena was waiting, lantern in hand. Her face went pale at the sight of him. "They spoke to you, didn't they?" she whispered. The same voices that haunted Caleb. Ethan dropped the ledger on the desk, the worn leather cover thudding against the wood. His voice was low, firm. "They don't want this book leaving town. That means there's something inside worth killing for." Lena's hands tightened around the lantern, its light flickering like a warning. And in that moment, Ethan knew the ledger wasn't just a record. It was a map to the truth, and someone out there would do anything to bury it. The night deepened, and the wind howled through the empty streets. Ethan sat with the ledger open, scanning the faded ink. Each page was filled with strange symbols, coded notes, and names scratched out in haste. The deeper he read, the clearer the pattern became. The sheriff had uncovered a hidden network, dealings, debts, and disappearances that pointed to someone powerful within the town itself. Suddenly, a crash shattered the silence. The lantern toppled, spilling fire across the floor. Ethan leapt to stamp it out, but before he could rise, a shadow loomed at the window. A voice hissed from outside. "Leave the book, stranger. Walk away and you live." Ethan gritted his teeth, revolver in hand. "If you wanted me dead, you'd have pulled the trigger already," he shot back. The window pane rattled. A figure in a long coat appeared, face hidden beneath a wide hat. Only the glint of steel caught the light. They didn't shoot. They only watched. Then, another sound. From the roof, from the alley, from the darkness itself, more footsteps. Ethan realized he wasn't dealing with one man. He was surrounded. Ethan backed toward Lena, who clutched the lantern tightly, her face pale with fear. "They won't let you leave," she whispered. Ethan's eyes never left the shadows outside. "Then I'll drag the truth into the light, whether they like it or not." A sudden knock thundered against the office door, shaking the frame. The voices outside rose in unison, low, menacing, promising violence. Ethan cocked the revolver, steadying his aim. But then, silence. When Ethan dared to glance outside, the street was empty again, as if no one had ever been there. Only the wind moved, carrying a final whisper. "The ledger stays with the dead." Ethan closed the book, his jaw tight. "No," he muttered. "This story doesn't end in silence." Lena's hand trembled as she pointed to a page marked with a symbol, an old mining emblem. "That's not just code. It's a place," she said. Ethan's eyes hardened. Tomorrow, they would ride to the abandoned mines outside town. If the ledger was a map, that mine was the first destination. And someone, or something, was already waiting there. As Ethan and Lena prepared for dawn, the ledger's final clue burned in their minds. The abandoned mine. But what they would find there was not only the sheriff's secret. It was something far older and far darker. Next, episode 3, The Ghosts of the Mine.